Alright, Theory and Theology, what is up? Still recording. I'm debating if I'm gonna post all of these recordings today or stagger them. I think what I'm gonna do, because I said I'll post, I'm gonna post this in addition to the 2-hour one that I just record. I'm gonna post this same day, but then the other topics I might stagger throughout the week. I haven't really decided yet how I want to break down these topics, but let me look into my notes. So if you're skipping the previous episode, that's like 2 hours long of me rambling. Basically, what that consisted of was me kind of breaking down my process, this kind of restructuring process of it's like a restructuring strategy, kind of identifying what's going on, trying to like slow down the processes for me, and then break them down, dive into them with every little area, and kind of see kind of what works, what doesn't, as far as like ideas pulled from indigenous cultures and kind of the spectrum of those ideas, those traditions and ideas, all the way up to the modern world where everything is like AI this, AI that, let's get a neural link, you know, and everybody buy a Tesla, you know, and listen to the news and suffer, you know. That's kind of, I'm not going to talk much more about that. I spent 2 hours going through a lot of those topics, and pretty much any spout any spout of an angle that I could kind of take off of that, I tried to see where my mind was going with it, but also it was like a very freestyle form without notes, and so I'm hoping it made sense. It's one of those episodes that I feel like I'm not ever going to go back and listen to because it might be a little embarrassing or cringy, but I don't know. No, I don't think so. I think I can't be the only one that's thinking like this. But also, these conversations aren't really being had too much. There are a few people on YouTube that I've seen videos of, like, I stayed off my phone for 15 days, or like I, avoided the internet for like 30 days, or like, all these different things that people are doing and trying, and like what they're accomplishing in the process. Like, I want to go back to being productive and sharp and motivated, and creative, and have a lot more self-control. I've definitely lost a sense of self and self-control with all the easy access to like internet and online everything. Now sometimes I think it is good to have content at our disposal, but I want to have firsthand experiences too about practicing some of the stuff that the content talks about, not just consuming, learning, but not doing anything. I want the action part. That's the part I'm trying to beef up, are the actions. But yeah, that's how I'm going to transition into this episode. Okay, so the notes I wrote at the beginning here, I think I'm actually going to skip. I'm going to skip that because I think that's its own topic. And I'm going to skip down to some Bible-y stuff. But okay. I was watching an interview. If you remember the artist Modest Yahoo, how he used to be religious, or Chabad. I don't know if he would say he's not religious, but he was a, a Jewish follower of Chabad teachings when he first came on the scene with his when he first came on the mainstream scene in music. Kind of had like reggae, but Jewish. Now reggae in Israel does seem to be and in like Jewish cultural kind of music, it has seemed to take on in that culture. I say this because I've talked about this a little bit, that I've had some Putumayo albums and kind of dabbled with some Israeli musician content, and there is there is reggae to be found. You do kind of there are kind of I don't know how to differentiate, but there are some people, there are some people who are how do I say this? I've come across content where there are people who are Jewish who do seem to have some overlap with kind of like, I don't want to call them Rastafarian because they're not Rastafarian, but you'll see things like dreadlocks. Sometimes you'll see dreads or locks. I guess locks is the preferred term. Sometimes you see people with locks. Sometimes you'll see, people with like a knit skull cap. Like, there's this whole Heshi Freed had the funniest video on this, and it's okay. I have an interesting, oh man, Heshi Freed's content tuned me in to a lot of Jewish cultural terminology more than almost anyone else, because just check his stuff out. From satire, FRUM satire. His videos have got to be like 12 to 15 years old now. Like, it's old stuff. It was probably some of the earlier Jewish content that I would watch when he would post more regularly. He was Orthodox Jew, kind of Chabad, but he would also interview people. He would interview some people, but he would also just be talking, and he kind of talked about the yarmulkes, the skull caps, the hats, the especially and maybe like hair styles and wigs and things of different Jewish culture, like head coverings in general. There's like this whole ranking or categorizing of people. The easiest thing I can equate it to is like in Western society, if you live in a city and you see like the people who kind of have like the punk rock outfits and the emo kids and the people who are kind of more like thrifters, like the Gen Z thrifters, or people going back to those like vintage style clothing, or people who embrace like hip hop culture, skaters. And it's kind of like, you can kind of tell, like, everyone's kind of, for the most part, wearing shoes, pants, if not a skirt. But most people, I'd say more people wear pants and shorts than skirts in general, at least where I live. But you'll usually see some style of like pant and shirt and maybe some kind of headwear. You'll usually see that with people. Um, and so that's one thing I've definitely noticed is you'll see with different people what they wear, and you kind of identify them as being part of a certain group because of the way they're dressed. That's one thing that I've kind of noticed. Okay, going back to talking about the Jewish people with the types of headwear. There are people that are so Chabad. Usually they're gonna have, the curls on the side, the payas. They're usually gonna have wearing black. I'm just talking about men here. Black pants, white shirt, black jacket, black hat. Usually a yarmulke under the hat. Now some people shave their head underneath. I don't know why. I don't know if that's like a representative of like a new, like starting fresh. I've seen that though, that there, and maybe it's just a certain sect, a certain group of those people has their heads kind of shaved, more bald under, and it's just the payas on the sides. Some people have smaller curls, longer curls. The hats are different. Some people wear the hat kind of flipped up. Some people wear it down. Some people have a wider brim. Some people have a more narrow brim. With the tzitzis or the tassels on the side of the garments. Some people wear them with that blue techlet thread in it. Some people don't have that. I don't know how to tell the difference between all. I just know that there are differences. I just don't know specifically. Some people have the crushed velvet hats. Some people have the six portion, or the 4 portion, or the suede, or the knit, or the bigger knit one, or I think it's called Bukharia. Don't quote me on that, but it's like I think the Russian people wear more of like it's like flatter on the top, but I think it's called like a Bukharia. I might have these names wrong. Or you've seen like the knit ones that are like bigger, or like the thread is thin, or the thread is fat. So when I'm talking about the people that are kind of more with the locks, they tend to be kind of more hippie-esque seeming. Like they don't wear the Chabad clothes. They don't wear Orthodox clothes. But they still have like their hair a certain way, or like they have like the skull caps might be knit. I've seen it more with knit skull caps in the a knit skull cap and the locks. Now I've seen reggae more around those people, and I don't know if it's like Kabbalah that they're kind of into, but it is, they're kind of very like spiritual, but they're not Christians, and they're not Chabad, and they're not the Nachman guys with the white skull caps. They're like a whole different thing. But I've seen them on some videos. They tend to be into like, from what I am determining just with some of my limited knowledge here, Kabbalah and Talmud. It seems to be their kind of focus, and like these like these very like esoteric concepts, which I slowly like to learn bit by bit, but it's very complex stuff, and there's a part of me that doesn't want to hear the traditional viewpoints before I've read it for myself. This morning I listened to something that was a traditional viewpoint, and I was kind of like, I don't really want to hear that. I don't really want to hear like what the sages said. I want to read the text, let me read the English translation of the text and see what I gather from it. And if I can put the pieces together within my own mind before I learn what the tradition says that it's supposed to mean. Because it's not my tradition. I wasn't raised with this, so I really don't have a dog in this fight, per se. But yeah, I like it. I think it's fun. But the reason why I mention it, all of that, is because, listening to Modest Yahoo's interviews, he's had some during this year, or during the last 12 months, maybe end of last year, beginning of this year. So 9 months ago, 6 months ago, I found some interviews, some longer form interviews of him. And he started talking about Israel, and someone kind of brought up the concepts about Hebrew Israelites, which tend to be a black group of Christian, an offshoot of Christianity. I think what they believe is that they are, you know what? I'm going to let other people look it up because I don't really know. I just know they tend to be black. Sometimes they wear like certain types of fringed shirts. They tend to read the Bible. They tend to have an interpretation of the Bible that they are the original Hebrews, or they are the original Israelites, or that all black people are, or something. That's about as far as I can maybe explain. But they're very knowledgeable somewhat about the Bible to be able to talk to people about their perspectives. And they do kind of speak loudly sometimes when they're out in public. Like, I think some of my favorite videos about Hebrew Israelites is when they came into contact with the Mormons. And then the Hebrew Israelites just took over the whole Mormon missionary conversation and were just like, talking about that. They're very studious. So them, as well as reggae culture, as well as Rastafarian culture, and how they relate to Israel. Like, when you listen to reggae music, I can almost dare you to listen to it for like a day and not hear the word Zion. Like, and I don't know if that has to do, I don't know if their idea of Zion, if it has anything to do with Zionism. I have no idea. I rewatched most of that 1981 movie version of the book The Chosen. Right now it's free on YouTube. But the movie takes place in World War II times. Before Nazi Germany is taken down, before the U.S. is kind of like involved, and how Jewish people are getting treated, and then the information that comes out, and it's basically one religious Jewish guy, and him and a Hasidic teen, they're in their last years of high school going into college. They befriend one another and start to interact. And, I'm not going to tell you the whole story. Watch the movie. It's free on YouTube. Really good movie. But there is this concept in there that's like, I just remember the phrases because I've watched this movie so many times, where the ultra religious Jews are intertwined in this like school, this university or college in New York with other Jews, other Jewish males, but they're not all the same sect of Judaism. So they range from like, oh, Jewish, not religious, to ultra religious. And there's one point where the religious Jews are passing out pamphlets on the sidewalk saying, no state of Israel without the Messiah. No state of Israel without the Messiah. You know, like just passing out flyers to anyone who wants to take them. And then there's another scene in the cafeteria where one of the not so religious Jews, and you can tell because they're not wearing the black with the white shirt, and so it's like you can kind of tell who's who just by the way they're dressing, even though they're all Jewish people at this college. And the religious one comes up to the not so religious one and says, you know, you're worse than Hitler. He destroyed the Jewish, they say the Jewish body or the Jewish mind. But it's like, you're worse than Hitler because you'll destroy the Jewish soul. Talking about like people who want a state of Israel. And so there's this conflict even within Judaism about the state of Israel without the Messiah. That the Messiah is going to be the one that brings forth Israel. And so there are people that are against, there are Jewish people that are against the state of Israel, Israel being like a thing. So even when you see people out protesting, you'll see sometimes when people are pro-Palestine, and you'll see some ultra-religious Jewish people, I don't know which groups these are, but I've seen footage of ultra-religious people that are Jewish being on the side of the Palestinian side. But then also, I've noticed in a lot of these interviews, from the few that I've tried to see, when they try to interview people that are protesting, a lot of them won't speak up. And the ones who do speak up, it's like when they ask what they're protesting about, they're all saying something completely different from one another. So it's a very confusing situation. And I've been thinking about it without trying to dive too much into what's going on currently, but just from like other content. So that's why I was kind of listening to Modest Yahoo, some of his stuff, because I got back into I've been working on this reggae cover, this reggae song. And okay. So I went from that, and I was like, I remember the Bible talking about some concepts that I'm still not completely understanding. So some of the concepts on that list, the firmament, the Nephilim. So this morning I kind of went and did like, just a brief look at some of those passages just to kind of see if anything else stuck out. This term NiHam, where it first starts talking about the sons of God. That term maybe never stuck out to me too much. when it comes to Nephilim, this is kind of near Genesis 6, like near the flood story of Noah, but like kind of right before that starts happening, after it talks about all the descendants. And I went, because I think on Friday I was talking with a friend and we were kind of discussing like, and I got really confused with watching that Russell Crowe version of of Noah's Ark story. All right, gotta fix these windows, man. It's getting loud. Um. So, in the Russell Crowe version of Noah's story, there's a guy who I don't know. So, who's in the ark? Basically, was the question. Because we're talking about populating the earth, right? Because I'm trying to go back to like where does this conflict even start in history? Now, I don't know all of history. I know Bible history, kind of. That's probably the most history I actually know. Probably, honestly, even better than American history for the most part. My interest in American history is pre-European. Like, the only Europeans I'm interested in with history is maybe like with maybe U.S. history or the Americas in general. Is kind of like the ideas that like maybe Vikings made it to North America. I'm really interested in that. I'm interested in Viking culture, pagan culture, all the pre-Christianity stuff. I'm totally interested in that. Because that, I don't know, I've got a lot of like deep interest in stuff that I just don't want to start talking about it now because I'll get way off topic. But I talk about it more around Halloween time, and that's going to be coming up soon, so I'll be studying some of that stuff coming up. But I really have an interest in paganism because of how deep it runs through Christianity, and also because at some point it was, if you're following Jewish history, it's like Jewish history versus everybody else. And there was no Christianity at some point. So it's like you're either Jewish, according to Jewish history, you're Jewish, or you weren't Jewish. Christianity creates this weird kind of hybrid thing where it's like you've got like now Christians who are following this Jewish rabbi, but are they really following him? Because now there's all these other pagan ideas thrown in. And then in addition to that, you've got, modern day Islam, which also wasn't fully a conversation too much. I know when you think about Muhammad, like what was he doing before he got involved with the messages from Allah? Like those people were doing something like the Kaaba, where people go for pilgrimages. It was already like a worship center, but a pagan worship center. I mean, there's a lot that's just like, there's a lot of stuff in history that's like, it's going to take me the rest of my lifetime to really be able to dive into this stuff. But I really like it. So, yeah, I've been diving into some of this Jewish history. So yeah, the stuff with the Nephilim was already confusing. And then before that, the stuff with Cain. I guess the only point I really wanted to say with Cain was because the lineage of Cain takes you into Noah. But, okay, there's just a little point there with Cain where, Cain kills Abel. God makes Cain leave. He goes toward the land of Nod. And he's scared that there's going to be other people that want to kill him. And God's like, no, that's not what's happening. I'll put a mark on you so that no one can kill you. Um, but you're banished, basically. You're banished from, I guess, contact with God, contact with community. But at that time, it seemed like there was Abel that got killed. There was Adam, there was Eve, there was Cain. So who were these other people that he was afraid were going to kill him? I don't understand that part. That's the part where I'm like, what? Because later on it goes into talking about how the populations of the earth were spreading. This is like pre-flood, and then it starts going into that story about the Nephilim and all this. And then, the people who get into the ark are Noah, his wife, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and their wives, right? And then it says later on that from those people, everything else was populated, right? And the name Canaan comes up. Canaan is Ham's son. So Canaan is the son of Ham, or Ham, or I don't know how you pronounce it, but Ham. Canaan is the son of Ham. And I'm reading this about Canaan. The person Canaan, he basically spreads into Gaza. I don't know if these are like modern day, but it's like, I don't know how different the names are. But the names that stuck out to me were Gaza and Nineveh. Now, I think Nineveh, if I'm not mistaken, Nineveh's in Iraq. I want to say Canaan is also in Iraq. Am I wrong? Is that modern day Baghdad? Am I wrong? I could be wrong. I need to look this up, but I'm refusing to look this up because I'm trying to memorize it. But if that's the truth, and look it up, don't take my word for this. Go and pause this and look this up, because if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I don't even think I'm right. I'm speculating based on what I think. What I think I read in the past, like not even recently. But I think I looked into what modern day Canaan is. So some of these places, these Middle Eastern places, so you have Canaan. And Canaanites, that comes up so much. After the book of Deuteronomy, isn't the land of Canaan, where's the promised land that they're trying to go into before, where'd they send spies? They sent spies, were the spies not sent to Canaan? I could be wrong. Look it up. Please look it up. Don't take my word. I try to be accurate, but I also, sometimes I have to just like talk. I can't just fully be right all the time. And I'm just trying to I'm trying to make a point here. So, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, it goes into these stories about these different people and their work that they do, and it turns out, after the flood, Noah starts winery. So he's making wine. He has a vineyard. Gets too drunk. Ends up not having his clothing on, and is kind of in the nude. I'm assuming that's what it sounds like. He had some kind of nakedness exposed, and I guess he catches wind of the fact that his son Ham's son. No, it was Ham. Was it Ham or Canaan? It was either Ham or Canaan. Canaan is the son of Ham. So it was either Noah's son Ham or Ham's son Canaan, who, I think it was Ham, who looks at Noah, kind of laughs and goes and tells Shem and Japheth. And Shem and Japheth take like a cloth or blanket or something and walk backwards in a way to cover Noah without Noah seeing, without them looking at Noah. And then Noah either catches wind or knows. I can't understand if someone told Noah what had happened, or Noah was maybe conscious enough to kind of like realize what Ham was doing. And he gets cursed. Canaan gets cursed, right? Canaan gets cursed. So that's why I'm not sure if it was Ham or Canaan who looked at Noah naked, but Canaan gets cursed, saying that he's going to be he's going to be a slave to Japheth and Shem. Canaan gets cursed. Okay. But Canaan, and as far as the land of the Canaanites, they had a big territory. And it sounds to me like part of this was Gaza. I could be misunderstanding this. Maybe the borders have changed over time. But that would mean that this land that's being debated over, there's some information traced all the way back to Noah's time period, where the sons, Canaan gets cursed and is going to be enslaved to Japheth and Shem. Right? Read it yourself and see if that is what you come up with. Because sometimes I'm like, I don't know. Because they didn't teach us this kind of stuff at school. Like, I'm looking at this for, like, what's going on in modern day. And, like, what the heck? You know, where did all this start? That's kind of the earliest place I'm seeing these names pop up. Canaan, or Gaza. I don't know if Gaza's mentioned before that part of Genesis. That's the first place I see it, and that's the first interaction with it that I see. But then later on, when you get past Deuteronomy, or past, when they're about to enter the promised land, by this time, by the end of Deuteronomy, Jacob, who becomes Israel, is already born. Israel's the one who's the father of, the lineage of, like, Joseph and Reuben and Levi and all those guys. Remember, Joseph goes to Egypt and all that. He gets sold into slavery, the coat and all that. You guys remember that story. And so that's where the name Israel comes from. Jacob's name is Jacob is Israel, basically. But Jacob, so who is it? Jacob and Esau, right, are the sons of, wait, I'm mixing up Isaac. Who's Isaac then? Well, there's Isaac and there's Jacob. Isaac was the one that Abram almost sacrificed, right? So Isaac is the son, but Ishmael is also the son of Hagar and Abram. So a lot of the Muslim population takes from Ishmael, which technically, according to Jewish law, as I read it, when it talks about that you can have a legitimate child through your slave, and this was the wife's servant or the wife's slave, Sarai's slave, was Hagar, and Abram had a kid with her as the firstborn. Ishmael was the firstborn, right? And I don't understand fully how Muslims get so attached to Ishmael, but they believe, I guess there's a Middle Eastern culture that's connected to the lineage of Ishmael that maybe isn't considered Jewish somehow, but they're Muslim nowadays. So that's another whole factor going on, where you have the Jewish people versus the Muslim people, but then you also have Israeli people versus the Palestinian people. But all of them have been there for, like, God only knows how long. Like, if we're going back to Noah, I mean, come on. Like, I don't even understand, like, how is a person supposed to understand, like, what this even is as, like, a war, or what it even is, you know? Like, I mean, I don't promote Holocaust and genocide and things like that, but I also see it for what it is. It's like everybody's killing everybody. They've been killing each other. Like this, I mean, if you read from pretty much before God wipes out everybody in the flood, supposedly, if that's what happens. But just, if you just take the story at face value, and the earth was repopulated by Noah and his family, right before that, the people who were there were doing no good with the Nephilim and all these other things going on, and all the problems that were happening, where God was like, I gotta get rid of this. And there was something in there that I didn't really understand that talked about, like, their flesh, and they can't live past 120 years old. Like, God was going to limit the lifespan of humans. Because you start realizing that these people are old. Like, they're living to be, like, 800 something years old. Like, most of them are living to be, like, 800 something years old. Like, before this flood comes. Like, they're living so long. I think the youngest person, and I'm not fully sure about this, I think the youngest age that I saw of somebody giving birth after Eve had her last kid, Seth or whatever, after that you see, who is it that had it? Okay, after she has her kid, who is Seth, someone else was born. Yeah, I think the youngest age where a male was mentioned to have a kid was 75 years old. That was like the youngest of the ages that I saw. Everyone else was having kids in like their 80s and 90s and 100 something years old. They were having their firstborn. And so I don't know if puberty was not at the same rate as it is now, but they were living to be 800, 900 years old. 800 something. Most of them died at like 800 something years old. Methuselah lived to be 969 years old. And then from that point, you know, God's like, no. And another thing I noticed kind of back with Cain and Abel is kind of interesting that, like, it was God talking to these people. It was God talking to Cain and Abel. So it's kind of interesting. That's like, okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around, because they're like, there's a certain point after the flood, and then these guys have all their lineages. Ham, Shem, Japheth, all have their lineages listed out, and then it says at a certain point, like, this is when people started invoking the name of, you know, that capital Lord. This is when people start invoking that name of God. So it's like, what was going on before? Because it seems like people, I could have a timeline wrong, but people were really directly talking to God. God was talking to Noah. Enoch had been abducted. Is that the word? What do you call it when Enoch got taken up? Whatever that means. I don't understand what this stuff means sometimes. But Enoch got taken. I'm not going in order. I'm kind of bouncing back and forth. I apologize. But I guess what I'm trying to make sense of is who was there? Who was there first and who are those people? Because it sounds like the Canaanites were there first. But it's like if supposing we all came from Ham, Shem, Japheth, and Noah and his wife, that's it. That's the reason. I mean, I don't know, but that's the reason why I mentioned that Cain story, is because when I was thinking about that the other day with a friend, I thought about it and I was like, oh, Cain. I remember that little part about Cain. Supposedly there shouldn't have really, at least if we're going linearly, there shouldn't be any other people. There were Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel. Abel gets killed, so there's only Adam, Eve, and Cain. So who is he afraid of is going to kill him? You know, so I'm kind of wondering if with the flood, if that was a situation where it's like, they say there was only Noah, his wife, Ham, Shem, Japheth, you know, they all have kids and stuff, but were there other people out there? Because that sounds like a lot of multiplying. I mean, it says all the sons. It only really talks mostly about sons. Every now and then there's a daughter mentioned here or there. But there were still people like killing and stuff. I guess, was it Lamech? There's some names that are like multiplied names. I think, I don't know. I don't want to go into it because I don't really remember. But I think the names like Lamech comes up a couple times. Comes up with Cain and comes up later on with Noah. But Lamech, that name. But, you know, I'm just wondering, I don't know who is there first. You know, who is the initial inhabitant of the land? I mean, the first place I see Gaza mentioned, if we're talking biblically, is with that story of you know, you hear Canaan being cursed, and then you hear that Canaan's region was including Gaza. I don't know if it was including Gaza or went to the border of Gaza. I don't know how if I'm understanding that correctly. But the way I'm interpreting it is that Gaza is included, as well as Nineveh. Gaza is included in the land of Canaan. But if Canaan is enslaved to Shem and Japheth, according to that prophecy or whatever that punishment was there, because of what happened with Noah. And who said the punishment? Was it Noah or was it God? And then, I don't know, it's just interesting that they're sacrificing. But there's no religion at this point, is there? I mean, all you really see is, like, God talking to people like Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, Noah. Something happens with Enoch. there's Nephilim who are, and then there's like the sons of God. I don't understand that term, sons of God. It seems like a term that we still need a lot of diving into, but I don't understand it. I don't understand um um like what were people even doing? It sounds like they would take sacrifices to God. That's mostly what they would do, like first fruits. It sounds like, I don't know if you hear people praying. There's no temples because they're with God, like there. Like you don't even get commandments all the way until because they hadn't even gone into Egypt at this point, and so you don't even have commandments until they're out of Egypt. And so I'm still trying to figure out, like, okay, what are these? These seem like Middle Eastern and African tribal people. Just tribal people. I mean, I come from tribal people. I'm not the most educated even on my own culture because it runs so deep, and there's been a lot of disconnect of people trying to like westernize so hardcore that our African tribal group isn't I don't want to say it's not thriving, it's not recognized, but when I say what it is, people have never heard the language and they don't really know what it is. It's not like a mainstream culture. Zulu's the closest thing to it that people, oh, I've heard that, but Ndebele, people don't know what Ndebele tribe is. Like most people do not know. Most people do not know. But that's something that I I've been able to kind of understand somewhat how tribal groups work. Like it's still kind of the same. Like when you hear like a tribal, there's nothing like in American society that really is relevant to this, but you see this with a lot of indigenous cultures where people introduce themselves. I'm so and so, and this is my father, so and so, descendant of this person, descendant of this person, descendant of this person, descendant. Like they kind of go down the lineage of like some of the original history of their people. In the U.S., we don't really talk like that. We don't say like I'm Bob and my dad is Carl, and this is our last name Smith. Of the Smiths that originally came over, with some mission group out of Spain, for some kind of reason where we came to this country and were, blacksmiths working under the church or something. I don't know. People don't talk about that. They don't run deep with their. They might run deep with it, but they don't, like, usually when you're introducing yourself, you don't traditionally say that. There are cultures where traditionally when you're introducing yourself, and I've noticed this in a lot of tribal groups, when you're introducing yourself, or even the way your name is written, you might have more names. Like I know I've had a lot of Mexican friends or Latino friends that have like 4 names or so. It's not uncommon for certain people to have like a lot of different names or a lot of different cultural, like, people come up to them and they kind of like say a lot of the lineage. And so, I don't know, when I'm kind of reading the Bible, I kind of think about that. I'm like, oh, like, okay, it's important that these lineages are here, and who's connected to who, and who's in what land, and who's in what place. And then you fast forward all the way to like 2024, and you've got people like overtaking freeways and campuses, you know, in support of one tribal group over another tribal group. But it's the way I see it is like it's tribal groups that, you know, run deep because they've kept track of their history and their tribal lineages, and they're sticking to it, and they're like, this is our land, you know. And that part I can kind of resonate with that, you know, being from, you know, a history of people that was taken off their land and made to westernize and assimilate, and being taught that you need to be more British like. You know, the Zulu nation was a force of its own. I mean, if you study Zulu history, you can see that there's a lot within that history that is like, you know, they didn't really need all that. Like, if you look at Rhodes, was the guy Rhodes, Rhodes, and I might have to go more into some other history because this is no longer like talking about Gaza or Palestine or Israel or any of that. Like, this is Africa. But, you know, when you look at that history, it was not that long ago that our people were kind of like taken over by these others. And yeah, Rhodesia, that's where the name Rhodesia, that is now modern day Zimbabwe. But Rhodes, Rhodes, he was the one that kind of had a hand in that and was like, I think he was like involved with like Queen Elizabeth or something. I don't know which queens, queens of England or whatever. But that's kind of like, remember when she passed, and there were a lot of people that were kind of like, you know, like being like, well, she's a colonizer, and like had a hand in like, you know, a detrimental hand in like trying to destroy so many cultures. That's the first time I ever heard something like that, when there's like a death of like a major figure in history where people are like, we don't support that. We don't support what she's done in history. Let's not recognize her in a good light and be like, oh, the queen or whatever. It's like, she's not everybody bought into it like she's our queen. It's like, yeah, she was over there doing a bunch of other stuff in other countries and supporting that we kind of can't all get on board with. So when she passed, there was a lot of controversy about her death. But yeah, my lineage of people was kind of caught up with the British coming over. Well, the Dutch too. But there are also a lot of South African Jews. It's just an interesting history in that area if you look into it. There's, I don't know. It's tough. History's tough, you know, because there's, you know, somebody's always going to be losing and hurt and, you know, having their culture kind of like affected and traumatized by some other force that's like enforcing systems on everyone. It's kind of hard to really kind of understand it, you know. And I feel like for me, with all the things going on in the Middle East, like, I like to study, like, I'm trying to study more of like the origins of things, but it's kind of really hard to do because I don't fully understand it. And there's a part of me that doesn't want to like look into the modern material. I kind of want to just keep looking at the ancient stuff for now. to see what I can gather before I kind of start listening to someone else with a modern agenda. Because I feel like I'll be tainted by that. I don't want a modern approach from modern day historians or anthropologists kind of telling me what it is now. I want to see, like, in a vacuum, because we can't really realistically do the in a vacuum kind of scenario, but in a vacuum, what does it look like? And I feel like in a vacuum, it's a lot more complicated than it seems by watching YouTube. Because, I mean, you can't go... Is it possible to give a people back their land? Give the original people back their land? Because I just want to talk about tribes in general. And the reason why I mentioned being part of a tribal group that is pretty westernized is because that's important. Because it's not like I don't have a dog in a fight when we talk about tribal groups and indigenous populations. It's just that, I was raised by people who were, like, didn't really see a lot of value in exposing me to that part of my heritage. And now later on in life, I'm getting pushed and pulled into trying to be more engaged in life, more engaged with people who I just need to be basically more engaged with people who are just more engaged with people who are like of my family and culture, and trying to kind of learn more firsthand, secondhand from them, and learn more about the culture that I'm, bloodline related to, but unfortunately got whitewashed out of. And so sometimes when I'm looking at, like, all the Israel Palestine stuff, I'm kind of more in a mindset of, what does it look like for tribal groups? It's kind of not possible to have a tribal group and completely give back, in all fairness, give back all their land. I'm sure any tribal group wants that, but, things have moved forward and people have developed there, had kids and had populations of people, and now they feel like it's their home. But also, it's like the history of where it comes from is important, which is why I do like... It's not the only reason why I like indigenous American history. I like it because it's important. I've got a little mixed in there too, but it's not enough where I could pinpoint this certain family member is an indigenous person to me that I can talk to. I think the closest people were my grandma and great grandma, and they're no longer alive. So, I've got ancestors that all I have is memories of what I've learned from them and what I've seen from them. My grandma lived to be, I think, about 98. My great grandma lived to be about 105. Both very spiritual women. My great grandma mostly lived off of her garden and hunted and fished foods for the most part. She was active, spiritual, churchy. But I think, she's one of the few people I know that died mostly of old age. My grandparents on my dad's side, they both died in their 90s. I won't speak specifically about how kind of tragic, but they weren't really in good health. Um, and I don't know, like, I remember my dad didn't, because he kind of fled, so I don't really know exactly his full, he doesn't really talk about it, but he didn't go back to anywhere in Africa until I was like 16 years old. It was like my junior year, maybe I was 17 or so. I remember it was the Christmas I got my Ibanez guitar, so I was in my junior year of high school when I got that guitar. And that's how long it was until he went back. So I was like 17. Him and my mom had me, got married maybe 19 years, 18, 19 years before that time in my life. And I don't know how long he'd been in the country before he married my mom. So it was at least 18, 19 years before he'd gone back, which is wild to me. And then, so I'm pretty sure he saw his parents then. I don't recall, I don't think he made it back for either funeral on the time, at the time. Like, I don't think he saw either of them on their deathbed, pretty much. I don't think he went to my grandma's funeral. I don't recall him going to my grandma's funeral. He did go to my grandpa's funeral. But yeah, my dad doesn't talk at all about his parents. I've got some aunts that reach out and cousins that reach out, and I'm really trying, and nieces that reach out. I'm really trying to like absorb what I can and connect with who I can. But yeah, I've got an aunt that has a birthday. Her 70th is coming up in Zimbabwe. This coming, not this August 2024, but 2025. And I have like a year in advance notice now. So it would be really nice if I could make it, because I missed the 2023. But I really am going to try to prioritize going to that. It's going to take a lot of money, but I think if I can go, that would be great. I'm working on some language skills. It's just, it's a lot, guys. It's a lot. When you're from a culture that's been kind of told to not be that culture anymore, but so close to it, like, I feel like, and I'm not comparing to like African Americans and comparing someone who, whose parents aren't American, whose parents are immigrants, or half my family are immigrants. Well, the ones who did immigrate are immigrants. The ones who didn't aren't immigrants. It's just, American society almost doesn't even like recognize that there are black people that aren't like African American black people. Like, I know a lot of black people whose parents are from the Caribbean and from African countries. A lot of times, I wouldn't say they're whitewashed, but by the rest of black American society, a lot of us kind of get that people say, like, oh, like, why are you white, like why do you talk like that, like, why don't you talk like you're black, or like seem like more culturally stereotypically a certain way. I've noticed with a lot of people that I've known who have parents from African countries and Caribbean countries, islands, I've noticed with a lot of those people, like, I don't know, a lot of us don't fully feel African American either, because it's like, you're kind of other. It's like my parents might not be fluent in English, or they're bilingual or something, and it's like they come from a whole different mindset. They weren't born here, and so the ways you're taught to interact with the world are going to be different than the ways that people who maybe were here for a few other generations before. Not all my people were here for a few other generations before. So I mean, I'm just rambling about this, but it's like, when it comes to tribal groups of people in general, it's kind of hard to say, that you don't want the underdog to win, that you don't want the tribal people to kind of win against the big system machine. But when you have a thriving tribal group, I would say that Jewish people, they're Italians too. I think Italians are very tribal too. I don't really know, but I mean, I don't like to take like mainstream media and be like, oh, like this is 100% truth. But that's something I kind of took in and learned watching The Sopranos. Where they're very like, these are our people. We're from here. We're from this village. I think they're saying they're Nabalidan or something like that, and it's like there's different villages of people who are from there, and it's like when you think about Rome, like there's this line in The Sopranos where um there's like a Hasidic guy who, like, I guess their family runs a motel or something, or a hotel, and the son works for his wife's father for so long, and the he wants what's called a get, which is like a divorce. It's like a traditional way of getting a divorce. He wants this divorce, and he said something like, oh, like what, I should work for him and come away without a nickel, like that kind of thing. Like, like he's been working for his wife's father, and wants to divorce the wife because he's not getting what he wants financially out of that relationship with the in-law. And the father-in-law, of the I guess of the lady comes, or the father of the lady, of the wife, is the owner, I guess, the long-term owner that kind of hired that son-in-law. He basically, he's the father, and he's the owner, and he basically tells her, basically tells her, sorry. He basically says, at all costs, like, get me what I want, kind of thing. And there's a point where Tony Soprano and like one of the other mafia guys is like in like a hallway with with the Jewish guy, and they've kind of roughed him up a lot, and they're just like, and he's like a bull, this guy, like, he won't give in, and they kind of threaten him with his manhood, kind of thing, like, we're gonna castrate you, kind of thing. But he still isn't. I mean, nothing. It doesn't come to that, but like, it's just a scene where he's like, oh, like, as Jews, we've survived like this group and the whatever group and the Romans, and where are they now? And then Tony's kind of like, you're looking at them, like you're looking at the Romans, like the the modern day Italians, but it's kind of an interesting thing, because like when you look on, like, if I meet someone who's Italian, I don't think of them as like, oh, they've got these like tribal histories and like these villages that people come from, and all that, um like in Roman history is very fascinating, it really is, but you just really don't see that. It's hard to really see. I think with a lot of Caucasian cultures, a lot of times you don't really see the tribal side. You don't see that because a lot of them who kind of come to the U.S., like, unless it's like, you've probably seen that movie about Zamperini, how, he's from, his parents came and were like in the area that I live in now. That's why you always hear these planes going over with the Zamperini Field. But considered a World War II hero of LA, and his parents weren't American. I think they were Italian. And he would get picked on for being Italian by the white American kids. And that to me is really interesting because it's like, that was like in the 30s and the 40s. Like, it wasn't that long ago where there were Italian Americans that weren't being treated well, Japanese Americans that weren't being treated well. It's crazy to think of those times, it's like, but I do notice in Jewish history it often circles back to, people wanting to, tread on the Jews, and that's something that I'm kind of noticing. So I don't know. And in the book of Numbers, where you see, or in Hebrew, I guess it's called Bemidbar, like in the wilderness, it's like you see them coming up, like they're wandering, and then they're coming up across other people that are already established, and they're asking, can we pass through? Can we come through? And there's certain points where they're going to war. These are the Israelites, they're going to war with these people. And so it's kind of interesting because it's like, it does appear that at one point Canaan had Gaza. Canaan, which was the grandson of Noah, basically, had Gaza. But then, the way we get into the Israelites, the reason why they're called the Israelites is because of Israel, who's Jacob. That doesn't come up later. He doesn't come up until later. So you have this tribal nation that, they're not even, like, they're basically enslaved in Egypt, flee and go wander in the desert for 40 years, and then take over the promised land. So let me see. If I look it up now, if I look up where were the spies sent in the Torah, the 12 spies into Canaan, right? From the wilderness of Paran, right? So the 12 spies were sent into Canaan before the Israelites entered it, right? So the Israelites were not Canaanites? Obviously, they weren't Canaanites, but because you keep seeing this Canaan come up over and over and over and over. The first time I'm seeing Canaan come up is, with the story of Noah's nakedness. And then you see that Gaza's involved. If you look up what is modern day Canaan, is located in the southern Levant, which is now made up of Israel, the West Bank and Gaza, Jordan, parts of Syria and Lebanon. And so this is the land that the Israelites are trying to go back into when they are coming out of the book of Deuteronomy, going into Joshua. The promised land is Canaan. But then Canaan is from the lineage of Noah's son Ham, who he got cursed, right? And he's enslaved, or the nations are enslaved. The nations of Canaan are enslaved by Shem and Japheth. Who are they? Like, who are they? Like, I don't know. But to me, that's just kind of interesting, because it's like Canaan was already mentioned, but it doesn't sound like Canaan is necessarily attached to like a good reputation. So why it is that that later on, after the wandering in the wilderness, the Israelites want to take over Canaan, and how the idea comes that it's their land, but it was already Canaan's land earlier. It was already Canaan's land, even though Canaan gets cursed. And so I'm not really sure how that's supposed to work. Because who are these people? Like, I understand by the time the Israelites are going into Canaan, when they send out the 12 spies and all this, they're scoping it out, and there's giants in the land, and it's like this whole other situation going on. But I do understand that. I understand, okay, this is kind of the scenario of what's going on. But I don't know to what extent I fully understand this. Because you have these wandering people who are wandering because they left Egypt, but there is a tribal nation that gets captured and taken into Egypt, like, because they're called the Hebrews, and it's like, well, they go into Egypt for I don't know how long, but they're enslaved. I mean, I don't know what that looks like. I don't want to know fully, but you don't really get too much of an account of the enslavement of the Jews under Egypt rule. And as far as what I've seen archaeologists and anthropologists talk about, I don't know if there's like proof of a great migration out of Egypt of Hebrew slaves. Now, they do say that it's very likely that nobody would have written that down, if it's like an embarrassment to whatever pharaoh or whatever leader would have been involved with that. And they also say that there's no pottery or artifacts found like along a route where you would say, somebody's leaving and crossing the Red Sea or the Reed Sea or Sea of Reeds or whatever body of water these people are getting through. Like, you don't see evidence of people having lived on that land in that amount. But also, I am very curious. Because it feels like to me, the group of people that was enslaved in Egypt that leaves Egypt and now they're wandering, the Exodus happens, and then, Mount Sinai eventually happens, and you start realizing, these people aren't just idiots. I'm not, that sounds very insensitive, but I'm just saying in general, these people aren't idiots. They're organized. They have craftsmen, people who know how to build and work with metals and work with gold, and they have gold, they have oil, they have animals. If you think about, okay, building the Mishkan, that portable temple, the tent, and they have to carry this thing with them and break it down and take it with them, and then the Ark of the Covenant and all these things that they built. They're in the middle of the freaking desert building this stuff. Like, where are they getting all the materials? Where are they getting all the materials? Where do they get the knowledge? Like, if you told me and a bunch of my friends, okay, go out in the middle of Death Valley and go build a freaking temple, like, I don't have those skills that I could do that, where I would know what to do. But these people were skilled workers. So that makes it seem like, they had some abilities that they learned from somewhere. Like, these people have been practicing whatever crafts they've been involved in practicing for long enough to be professional to survive 40 years in the desert. As like a nomadic culture, they become like a nomadic tribe once they flee and survive out there. They're self-sustaining while they're multiplying. And then the people they're coming in contact with are like, these people are intimidating because there's so many of them. We can't let them in because they're going to overtake us. So that's already the population that they have before they even come in to the land. And so, but I'm just not sure who these people are. Are they the same people? Back in the Noah story, is this like a different, I'm pretty sure it's considered the same tribe because it's still Jewish history, but it's like, I guess I'd need to figure out what's the difference between the modern day people and the other ones, the ones in the Bible. And how do the Palestinians kind of get involved in all of this? Are they like an offshoot group of the actual Israelites that came into the Promised Land? I mean, are they from there? Because, I mean, there were already people in the land, right? You get what I'm trying to say? It's like, it feels like they're two different stories. They're two different things that happened. Because if supposedly all the land is populated by the lineage of Noah and his sons and his wife, then Canaan was already established back when Ham had the son Canaan, and Gaza was already his. But then if you fast forward past the book of Genesis and you get to the Joseph part, and then past that where you get into, the Moses part, when Moses is born, by the time Moses is born, by the time Moses is born, the babies, the Jewish baby boys were already getting killed. There was already something happening And that's why Miriam sends Miriam sends the basket with Moses, and then he gets taken up by the daughter of Egypt, of an Egyptian or something like that. He makes his way into Egypt basically, and there's a wet nurse who's Hebrew, a Hebrew wet nurse, but I guess he was raised amongst, the palace or something. I don't really know exactly. I mix up these stories, like watching movies like The Prince of Egypt and stuff, and then I'm like, what did the Bible say and what did the movie say? So, but that's kind of how I'm seeing it. Like, there was already some kind of, like, mass killing of Jews going on at the time when Moses enters, and, the people are enslaved during I don't know that if they were already enslaved or if it was during his youth they get enslaved, but his interaction killing the slave makes him flee, because once he realizes these are my people that are being treated like this, but he's a Hebrew. So Moses is a Hebrew and is not raised as a Hebrew slave. His people are enslaved. He gets them out of Egypt for the most part. Let's just skip the whole lengthy plagues and stuff. But if we look before Moses, Joseph was sold into Egypt. He was sold into slavery, but kind of worked his way up as well. And so Egypt was like a major force at that time, but didn't really seem... I don't know what they were doing as far... I don't understand how someone could sell someone else into slavery. I mean, it's just kind of it's something that to me is really confusing, because our culture doesn't technically have like a system where you can get enslaved. It's not like that. Where I can just capture someone and kidnap them and be like, you're a slave now. Like, there's trafficking. That's a type of enslavement, I think. But I don't know. That's a dark story when you think of, if you think of, your brothers putting you down a well and then, throwing you into slavery. But then he works his way up. But you have a lot of stories like this, where it seems like, even when you look at the story of Daniel, it's like with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and all these different... There's a lot of characters that you kind of see this thing where it's like, there's this nation that's bigger, that's kind of not on the side of the Jewish people, but then there's these people that kind of work their way up to the top. Daniel works his way up, so do his friends. Joseph works his way up. Moses, I guess, does too. I don't know exactly to what extent. But you kind of see this pattern where it's like, even if there's people getting captured or enslaved, they're working their way up into these nations that hate their people, but they're willing to give them positions of power. That's kind of an overlap, I'd say, of what you kind of see in modern day too. But I don't know. There is kind of another topic I kind of want to talk about, just ripping off of this, which is about modern day anti-Semitism. Now, I'm not saying I'm siding with anybody. I don't want to give that impression. I like the Bible, so I read stuff in it, and I'm like, okay, what's going on here? I don't agree with the killing, any kind of killing. It doesn't matter if it's Palestinians or Jews getting killed. I don't want any of them getting killed. That's my stance on it. I don't want any of these people getting killed. I don't want mass killings. I don't want kidnappings and capturings and terrorist attacks and all. I don't want any of that. I don't want people to feel like they have to have compulsory military men and women, being armed because of feeling threat. I don't know that many nations where men and women are forced to join the military, but I do see that in certain countries. It's not a completely foreign. It is foreign for the U.S., but it's not like a completely outdated idea that, guys of a certain age are, in the military until a certain age. So it's not just Israel that's doing that. But I guess my question is, who are the modern day Jews? I mean, I guess the modern day Palestinians. Who are they? Like, that's what I'd want to know. And I'm not saying, oh, take the Bible. The Bible has to be the only source, because I'm pretty sure there are other sources where people are like, well, these other people belong here, and then these other people are like, well, these other people belong here. And it doesn't matter really what these books say. It's basically whoever has the biggest guns and the biggest military is gonna win. And the best tactics to make someone else surrender. That's who's gonna win all of this. It doesn't really matter who was there first. We know that. When it comes to tribal groups, nobody cares who was there first. It's more about what are the resources and who. The interesting thing about this, though, I don't think it's a resource thing. I think it's a tribal territory thing. I don't know if it's a resource thing, because I've seen and it's not that much land. It's not that big of a space. I mean, I'm not saying there's no resources, but it's not like resources, to my knowledge. I'm not seeing like a major resource war. That doesn't seem like what this is. I could be so wrong, because like I said, I'm not fully following it, but I could be so wrong. But I want to take some time to talk more about social opinions, popular opinions, unpopular opinions, and I want to talk about those in this next episode.